a private chapel, an ancient golden font, and a name missing from every invitation. When Prince Louis was baptized in a hush-hush royal rite, few knew the font used had lain hidden for decades, belonging solely to the Queen Mother. But what truly shook the palace? Princess Beatrice wasn't even told. And what she found out next would shake the bloodline. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What began as a seemingly quiet royal moment was never meant to be quiet at all. Word spread first in fragments, then in whispers, then in a sudden rush of stunned disbelief. This was not an ordinary christening. This was not a routine blessing. This was a resurrection of something the palace itself had buried, an object wrapped in memory, power, and unspoken inheritance. The Queen Mother's gold christening font had not been seen, touched, or even acknowledged in official circles since her death. It was said to be sealed away, catalogued, protected not merely as an artifact, but as a symbol of a lineage that predated modern monarchy itself. And now, without announcement, without council approval, without the presence of entire royal branches, it had been brought back into use for Prince Louis. Inside the palace, the secrecy was immediate and suffocating. Only a microscopic inner circle had known the font still existed. Archivists who had signed lifetime confidentiality oaths, senior aides who had served both Elizabeth and her mother, a single ceremonial custodian whose family had guarded royal sacraments for generations. Everyone else, including senior royals, had been excluded. No formal record appeared on the royal court circular. No official photographer was present. No extended family acknowledgements followed. It was as if the moment had been designed to vanish the instant it occurred. But secrets in the monarchy never stay buried. They ferment, they spread, and they explode. When word finally reached Princess Beatrice, it did not come from the king's office, or from William, or even from a trusted aide. It came from an outside whisper, a name dropped in a conversation she was never meant to overhear. A gold font, the Queen Mother's font, used, given, passed, and not to her. The realization struck not just as an insult, but as an erasure. Beatrice had grown up with the Queen Mother's presence woven into her earliest memories, stories told in hushed rooms, small gestures of private affection, quiet assurances that some bonds were deeper than the public ever saw. And now, the most intimate relic of that bond had been activated without her knowledge, without her consent, without even a courtesy call. Within hours, tension rippled through every corridor of royal communication. Advisors scrambled, staff avoided eye contact. Old alliances stiffened into formality. Rumors surged that Catherine herself had overseen the decision, quietly arranging the retrieval, quietly approving the use, quietly redefining who had access to the monarchy's most sacred inheritance. To some, it was a touching gesture toward the future. To others, it was a calculated declaration of ownership, and to Beatrice, it was something far more painful. It was public exclusion wrapped in ceremonial gold, a message without words, a future written without her name. The palace tried to contain it. But emotion does not obey protocol, and legacy does not move without consequence. What was meant to be a private act of blessing had become a symbolic earthquake, one that cracked open old loyalties, reopened buried rivalries, and set the stage for a reckoning no one could control. But as news of the font's use leaked to the public, Beatrice wasn't the only one stunned behind palace doors. Loyalties began to fracture. For over 7 decades, the Queen Mother's golden font symbolized more than baptism. It was a promise of lineage, legacy, and rightful inheritance. Its sudden reappearance was no accident, but how did it fall into Prince Louis's hands, and who sanctioned its use? The font was not merely an ornamental relic of royal devotion, it was a vessel of spiritual continuity. Commissioned in the early 20th century, it had only been used during the most intimate and profound moments of the Queen Mother's private life ceremonies that were never televised, never photographed, never even recorded beyond whispers. It was a sacred object, understood by those closest to the late matriarch as her chosen seal of continuity, to be entrusted only to those she believed would safeguard her values and protect the spirit of the monarchy. Its presence at Prince Louis's christening was not simply unexpected, it was, to many, inconceivable. After the Queen Mother's death, the font reportedly vanished from royal circulation, rumoured to be sealed deep within the Windsor vaults. Listed under a code known only to select members of the Royal Collection Trust, years passed. Royal infants were baptised with official church silver or replicas of historic items. But the Queen Mother's font remained unspoken. Until now, the emergence of the font, pristine and unmistakable, has triggered shockwaves not just for its sudden presence, but for how it got there. No royal council was consulted. No formal declaration was made. Even King Charles, insiders claim, was unaware until after the ceremony had occurred. Whispers began to surface about a rarely used procedural loophole, an archaic, quiet override clause. Once reserved for moments of national crisis, this clause, it is believed, may have been invoked by Prince William under the guise of protecting ceremonial integrity. But critics argue it was a power play, one designed to bypass red tape and stake a silent claim. The font had long been considered an heirloom of spiritual power, and choosing Louis over Beatrice, over Eugenie, over the senior York line, signalled a seismic shift in how the monarchy viewed its internal hierarchy. Speculations swirled that William did not act alone. Some pointed toward Catherine's growing influence over royal tradition and narrative, suggesting she may have supported the decision as part of a broader campaign to reclaim symbols of the monarchy for her children, untouched by scandal, unblemished by controversy. Others raised darker theories, that Charles was not merely uninformed, but intentionally sidelined, his authority subtly eroded by his son's increasingly independent command of ceremonial affairs. The whispers gained traction as old staffers began to talk, and those once loyal to the Queen Mother questioned whether her final wishes had been respected or cleverly reinterpreted. What was clear was that the font's return was no random reappearance. It had been planned, executed, and guarded with the kind of precision that only comes from those who understand the power of symbolism and who intend to wield it. And while the font's resurfacing raised eyebrows, what came next lit the fuse for a full-blown royal rebellion. She thought she was still part of the future, but when Beatrice discovered the Queen Mother's most treasured heirloom had been handed to Louis without so much as a call, she erupted. What followed was not just outrage, but a calculated counterstrike from within the royal family. To understand Beatrice's fury is to understand her lineage. She wasn't merely reacting as a distant cousin watching a ceremonial misstep. She was the granddaughter of the Queen Mother through her father, Prince Andrew, a man who, for all his scandals, still remained a blood son of the late monarch's consort. In private, Beatrice had long believed that if the font were ever to be brought back into the fold, it would be through her hands. She had often spoken in hushed tones about family legacies, of conversations shared in Windsor's quieter corners, of subtle nods from elders who hinted that certain honours quiet, sacred ones would one day be hers to protect. That belief, whether real or inherited through decades of expectation, was shattered the moment she learned that Prince Louis had already been christened with the font she was never told had been found. The aftermath was volcanic. Palace sources now confirm that Beatrice penned not one but multiple letters, first to King Charles, then directly to William, demanding answers. The tone, they said, was unlike anything they'd seen from her. There was no deference, no softened language, just raw betrayal. In one message, she reportedly wrote, "If the Queen Mother's legacy can be redirected without acknowledgement, then what am I to this family decoration or descendant?" But it wasn't just ink on paper. At a private royal dinner held days later, Beatrice, usually composed, broke down, not with tears, but with trembling rage. Her voice cracked as she confronted senior family members, accusing them of erasing the York bloodline from history, one silent decision at a time. To some, it was unbecoming. To others, it was overdue. For years, Beatrice and her sister had remained loyal amidst chaos. Through their father's disgrace, through Meghan and Harry's public fallout, through the steady shrinkage of the family's public circle, the York sisters had said little, smiled often, and stood where they were told. But now, A symbolic inheritance had been given to someone younger, with less connection to the Queen Mother's direct line, and without so much as a discussion. It was a message Beatrice couldn't ignore. The York family's influence had been steadily fading, especially in the wake of Prince Andrew's disgrace and the Sussex exile. But for Beatrice, this moment wasn't about clout. It was about respect, about being seen, and about reclaiming something she believed was rightfully tied to her legacy. In conversations with close friends, she reportedly said, "If silence is loyalty, then I've been loyal enough. Now I speak." It was not a royal statement, it was a declaration of war, waged in the shadows, with weapons made of memory and truth. But even as Beatrice plotted her next move, deeper forces were at play, ones that sought to rewrite royal tradition itself. In the heart of the palace, there's a new architect of royal legacy, and it isn't Charles. Catherine's influence has grown silently, invisibly, but unmistakably. And those closest to her say the decision to use the Queen Mother's font wasn't just symbolic, it was territorial. For years, Catherine was seen as the dutiful daughter-in-law, the silent strength beside the future king. But beneath the poise and public grace, a new force was forming, calculated, patient, and deeply strategic. As the monarchy shifted into its next phase, it was not Charles but Catherine who quietly began assembling the pieces of the future. And nowhere was this more evident than in the choice to use the Queen Mother's most guarded relic for her own son's christening. Sources close to the inner court claim the move wasn't made hastily. It was the result of months of deliberate positioning, quiet negotiations with senior custodians, and a growing sense within palace walls that Catherine was no longer merely a figure of support, but of direction. It started with access. Private meetings with royal archivists and ceremonial historians that raised no alarms at the time. Invitations extended to aging curators whose loyalty had once belonged solely to the Queen and Princess Anne. Catherine asked questions that others didn't. She studied the rituals no one else remembered. She positioned herself as a guardian of tradition, not through speeches, but through silent presence, intimate curiosity, and unwavering consistency. When the moment came to choose a baptismal font for Prince Louis, it wasn't just a matter of symbolism, it was a declaration. Her son, not Beatrice's line, would carry forward the Queen Mother's silent blessing. And in that moment, the hierarchy shifted not through decree, but through execution. Those close to Beatrice saw it differently. They accused Catherine of rewriting centuries-old ceremonial rules for personal gain, of weaponizing tradition under the guise of continuity. One aide allegedly confided that the Yorks felt blindsided by civility, unable to retaliate because the move had been cloaked in reverence. But within the corridors of power, Catherine's position was unshakable. She had earned the trust of both the late Queen and Princess Anne, two women who had watched the monarchy weather storms of scandal, betrayal, and decline. And they saw in Catherine something rare: stability fused with foresight. She wasn't aiming for short-term victories. She was designing legacy. Her reported remark, quietly delivered to a senior staff member, "Louis represents the future, not the past," wasn't just a defense. It was a mission statement. Every decision, every symbolic gesture, every overlooked tradition revived under her guidance was meant to reshape the monarchy's emotional narrative, one that favored forward motion over backward loyalty. Queen Camilla's silence, eerily consistent throughout the turmoil, spoke volumes. Whether it was passive approval or strategic restraint, she offered no challenge to Catherine's maneuver. And in a court where silence often means alignment, that absence of resistance gave Catherine all the room she needed to move. And yet, behind every calculated move, there lies a trail of secrets none more shocking than the origin of Louis's baptismal claim. A dusty folder, a sealed royal directive, and one line that changed everything: to be passed to the child born under divine protection. When an archived Queen Mother letter emerged, naming her intended heir of the font, all eyes turned to a forgotten prophecy, and Prince Louis fit it perfectly. Hidden deep within the royal archives, beneath layers of correspondence and ceremonial records, a single envelope surfaced, its wax seal untouched, its contents unread for decades. It was catalogued under the Queen Mother's private estate files, marked for council review in the event of monarchical dispute. The letter inside, dated 1984, was handwritten in the Queen Mother's famously elegant script. What began as a soft recollection of royal duties quickly turned into something far more cryptic, a declaration, a vision, and to some, a spiritual warning. She wrote of a time when the House of Windsor would splinter, when loyalty would falter, and a child would be born beneath divine protection, destined to reunite and restore the soul of the crown. That child, she insisted, must be given the sacred font not through hierarchy, but through fate. Palace insiders revealed that the letter had been found mere weeks before Prince Louis's christening. The timing, they claimed, was no coincidence. It was discovered by a royal archivist during routine preparations for the anniversary of the Queen Mother's passing. The moment the passage referencing the font and the anointed child was read, everything shifted. Quiet meetings followed. Private analyses were ordered. And the question was no longer whether the font could be used, but who had the right to use it. The phrase divine protection initially puzzled some until it was paired with the harrowing circumstances of Prince Louis's birth, overshadowed by international turbulence, preceded by complications, and swathed in rumours that even the doctors whispered about divine timing. What followed was a full-scale authentication process. Experts in historical handwriting, ink composition, and royal documentation were summoned, discreetly, under heavy confidentiality. Not a single discrepancy was found. The letter was genuine. The Queen Mother had written those words herself, decades before Louis was even conceived. But what haunted the inner circle was her clarity. Her tone wasn't hopeful. It was exacting. It didn't ask for guidance, it gave it. She had chosen her legacy's vessel long before the crown knew who that child would be. With this letter in hand, the narrative transformed. What had once seemed like a bold maneuver by Catherine now took on the weight of destiny. The font's usage was no longer a breach of protocol, it was a fulfillment of prophecy. And in palace corridors, that word alone changed everything. Destiny cannot be questioned, it cannot be debated. The Queen Mother had not merely passed down an object, she had embedded within it a map to the future. One that Catherine, whether knowingly or not, had followed step by step. And yet, with every revelation came resistance. Not everyone accepted the letter's interpretation. Not everyone agreed that Louis was the intended child. But the machinery of the monarchy had begun to move. A new path had been chosen. The golden font was not given, it was fated. And so the crown prepared to rally behind this newfound destiny, unknowingly awakening an old threat, one that bore the mark of vengeance. Once ridiculed, now revered, Sarah Ferguson has stayed quiet through scandal and survival. But this time, she couldn't stand by. Her voice, once muted in the monarchy, exploded with power as she revealed her version of the Queen Mother's final wishes, and they didn't include Louis. For decades, Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, had been treated as a royal footnote, brushed aside, gossiped about, kept at arm's length. But beneath the tabloid ridicule was a woman who had borne witness to some of the most intimate and unscripted moments of the royal household. She had shared quiet afternoons with the Queen Mother, been entrusted with stories never told in official biographies, and heard confessions from a generation of royals who would rather die than speak aloud. And when the golden font, so closely tied to the Queen Mother's legacy, was handed to Prince Louis without consultation or context, something in Fergie snapped. Her silence, long mistaken for resignation, was in truth a vault. And now, that vault was being cracked open. In a televised interview that caught the palace off guard, Sarah Ferguson dropped a bombshell. Carefully composed but unmistakably pointed, she spoke of a private conversation with the Queen Mother in the early 2000s. According to Fergie, the Queen Mother had made it clear that her sacred possessions, particularly the christening font, should remain within the York line until the time came to pass it forward. That moment, Fergie claimed, was not meant to arrive in this generation but the next. She even suggested that the Queen Mother had informally named Beatrice as the keeper of that lineage, hinting that the future of that font was meant to remain with the granddaughter she saw as steady, dignified, and rooted in family history. Her words rippled through the monarchy like a seismic shock. Until now, no one had directly challenged the decision to use the font. Most criticisms had been whispered behind closed doors or disguised as ceremonial confusion. But Sarah broke protocol and shattered the unspoken rule. She questioned the legitimacy of the act itself. She insinuated that Catherine, through silence and circumstance, had maneuvered behind the scenes to claim authority where none had been granted. That by controlling the narrative of tradition, Catherine had redefined who was seen as worthy and who was left behind. Sarah's frustration didn't end with personal grievance. She voiced what many in the public had begun to feel, that the York family was being systematically erased from royal influence, that the sins of Andrew had been stretched to cover even the most innocent names. And that Prince Louis's christening with the Queen Mother's font was not just an oversight, it was a rewriting of royal memory, a quiet redaction of Beatrice's place in the monarchy's soul. Within hours, social media erupted. Supporters of the Yorks lashed out. Royal commentators were forced to reckon with a side of the story they had previously ignored. For the first time in years, the Duchess of York stood not as a scandal, but as a reckoning. Her voice stirred something old and buried within the monarchy, a hunger for justice, for memory, for truth not shaped by power, but preserved by promise. And as the media caught wind of these whispered betrayals, a storm began to rise, fueled by an unlikely ally from within the crown itself. When Princess Anne speaks, the palace listens, and this time, her words shook the walls. In a stunning move, Anne publicly challenged the decision to give Louis the font, insisting that her mother, the Queen, and the Queen Mother had very different intentions. Anne has never courted headlines. She's never chased power, never played to the cameras, never stirred scandal. Yet within the monarchy, she is revered as the silent force, the enforcer of tradition, the gatekeeper of order. But behind that quiet strength lies a loyalty forged not just in duty, but in memory. Her bond with the Queen Mother was not ceremonial, it was sacred, and the sudden, almost stealthy appearance of the Queen Mother's golden font at Louis's christening, without proper protocol, ignited something in Anne that the public rarely sees: outrage. Not theatrical, not performative, but a principled fury that cut through the pleasantries and demanded answers from the very top. What began as a private conversation behind closed doors quickly escalated into a confrontation. Insiders confirm that Anne stormed into a private council meeting with King Charles, refusing to sit, and laid out her position with unflinching clarity. She reportedly placed an envelope before him, a letter penned years ago by Queen Elizabeth II, referencing Beatrice as an anchor of stability in uncertain times. The letter, kept in Anne's possession for over a decade, had never been made public, until now. She used it not as a weapon, but as a reminder, a tether to the Queen's quiet vision, one that had always seen Beatrice not as a spare, but as a symbol of endurance. Anne's confrontation didn't stop with Charles. According to palace sources, a quiet but unmistakable standoff occurred at Windsor, where Anne met privately with Catherine. The details of the exchange remain tightly guarded, but one phrase leaked from a senior aide: "We are not dictators of legacy, we are guardians of it." That line, uttered by Anne, has since echoed through the institution. It wasn't a challenge to Catherine's status, but a rebuke of the process. Legacy, Anne insisted, cannot be claimed through silence. It must be carried through consensus, through remembrance, through truth. The fallout was immediate. Factions within the palace began to take sides. Some backed Catherine, arguing that the monarchy's survival depends on forward-thinking decisions unencumbered by outdated sentiment. Others stood with Anne, believing that a monarchy without memory becomes nothing more than a title on paper. The Queen Mother's font, once a symbol of grace and continuity, had become a lightning rod. And in the eye of the storm stood Princess Anne, undaunted, unapologetic, and immovable. But as royal factions fractured and alliances collapsed, one man remained eerily silent until now. Some say Charles knew, others believe he was played. A signature was found, a document authorized, But the truth is, murky was the king complicit in handing Louis the Queen Mother's treasure, or was he blindsided in the ultimate palace game? The moment the Queen Mother's font appeared at Prince Louis's christening, many assumed royal approval had been granted at the highest level, and indeed, a single document surfaced bearing King Charles's monogram official, sealed, and time-stamped just days before the ceremony. But something about it didn't sit right. The language was vague, the phrasing ambiguous, and nowhere did it explicitly mention the font. It referred only to a ceremonial item of historical relevance, authorized for use by the office of the Prince of Wales. That signature ignited a wildfire of speculation. Had Charles truly understood what he was approving, or had the language been crafted deliberately to veil the real intent? Palace insiders were quick to offer quiet contradictions. One aide claimed the document had been slipped into a routine briefing folder, buried among 5 others, with no verbal context provided before it was signed. Another said the king was fatigued that day, having returned from a series of engagements and relying heavily on his senior advisors to guide protocol. In hushed circles, questions began to swirl not just about his awareness, but about his autonomy. After a lifetime of waiting, Charles had finally ascended, but was the crown already slipping from his hands? The whispers grew louder as the king's health became the unspoken backdrop to every decision. Subtle signs, the delayed responses, the thinning schedule, the increasing presence of surrogates like William and Anne painted a picture few dared voice aloud. Had the palace begun transitioning power beneath Charles's feet, using the excuse of modern efficiency to sideline a sovereign whose reign had barely begun? And more crucially, had Catherine and William acted in anticipation of that shift, leveraging a moment of confusion to plant their legacy before the old guard could object? Even Queen Camilla's behavior raised eyebrows. Her absence from certain key events, her visible withdrawal from internal deliberations, her failure to publicly support or dispute the font's usage, all of it contributed to a growing sense that something was unraveling behind palace doors. Her silence, once protective, now felt deliberate. Some believed she was distancing herself from a decision she privately opposed. Others suspected she had warned Charles and had been ignored. But what no one could deny was that the air around the throne had changed. The unity that had once defined the transition from queen to king was fracturing. And in its place, a quiet tug-of-war had begun. William, meanwhile, moved with increasing confidence. Under the guise of delegated authority, he had begun shaping the monarchy in real-time, strategic engagements, curated narratives, symbolic gestures that planted flags in the soil of history. Each move, subtle but intentional, positioned his family as the central axis of the crown. With Louis at the heart of this storm, the golden font became more than a christening relic. It became a symbol of succession not just by blood, but by power. And in the end, with power shifting and lines redrawn, one question remains: what will Louis grow to inherit? A throne or a war? He's still just a boy. But around him, a storm brews names erased, traditions broken, legacies challenged. As Prince Louis plays in palace gardens, he remains unaware that his name has already changed the course of royal history. And the crown he may wear one day might come at a cost no child should bear. Innocence has always been the monarchy's most fragile illusion, and in Louis, that illusion lives and breathes blissfully untouched by the political undertow pulling at the feet of every adult around him. Yet, unknowingly, his name has become a banner waved in one camp as the future's rightful heir, and in another as the symbol of royal betrayal. The Queen Mother's golden font, once simply a vessel of sacred ceremony, now anchors that symbolism like an immovable relic. What should have been a quiet blessing has become the spark that split the house in two. His christening was never meant to ignite war, but it did. And now, his legacy is no longer his alone. It belongs to a kingdom divided. Within the palace, the divide between the Windsor and York branches has deepened into something colder, more permanent. While Louis thrives in the spotlight of anointed legitimacy, Beatrice has withdrawn from the centre. Some say she's gone quiet in sorrow. Others claim she's gathering strength for something yet to come. Her absence, though, is felt like a shadow across every event she once would have graced. The memory of her place in the Queen Mother's heart lingers like a ghost the palace pretends not to see. Her retreat may look like surrender, but those who know Beatrice understand. She was raised not for spectacle, but for survival. Catherine, meanwhile, stands unshaken. Her vision for the monarchy is calculated and forward-facing, stripped of sentiment and steeped in strategy. To her, tradition is only useful if it serves tomorrow, not if it clings to yesterday. And in Louis, she sees that tomorrow, clean of scandal, symbolically blessed. A child born into an institution that has endured only by evolving. But even as she carves this new path, the murmurs grow louder. Can a future built without reconciliation truly stand? Or will the fractures deepen until there's nothing left but performance and pageantry? Legacy, once a quiet inheritance, has become a battlefield. Not of swords or politics, but of symbols. The font, the crown, the memory of matriarchs who can no longer speak for themselves. As the royal family forges ahead, the question remains, what does it mean to inherit the throne of a broken house? What does it mean to wear a crown shaped by silence, ambition, and the weight of generations who were never truly heard? And through it all, Louis smiles, unaware. A child untouched by the burdens placed on his shoulders. But history has a way of finding those born beneath its shadow. And one day, the very innocence that shields him now may be the same thing the world demands he abandon. As the sun sets over a palace divided, one truth lingers in the air when history is rewritten. It always begins with the smallest hands holding the heaviest crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.